All right, today we're looking at something a little different. It's a single, pretty unconventional document that makes what might be one of the most extraordinary claims you'll ever hear about the climate crisis. Now, this isn't a typical peer-reviewed study, it's a self-published scientific dossier, and it presents a really radical and urgent warning for all of humanity. So let's break down exactly what it says. So, let's get right to it. The document comes from an author named Christos Sotirelis, who also goes by Morpheas. And he's putting forward a pretty radical new theory. The basic argument is that for decades, we've all been focused on the wrong thing, the wrong culprit for climate change, and that the real cause has been hiding in plain sight this whole time.
And the entire argument, it really hinges on this one number right here. According to the author's analysis, that's the statistical correlation between the global growth of our electromagnetic infrastructure and the rise in global temperatures. Now, just to put that in perspective for you, a perfect correlation would be a 1.0. So this number is suggesting an almost perfect lockstep relationship. As one goes up, the other goes up right along with it.
So, what are we really looking at here? Is this just a meaningless coincidence, maybe a statistical artifact? Or, as the author passionately argues, is it the single most important discovery in human history? The document frames this whole thing not as just some interesting curiosity, but as an incredibly urgent choice, one with truly existential stakes.
Okay, let's dig into the first section of this dossier, which is all about this idea of an unseen culprit, something else that's warming our planet.
The author gives it a name, the KLEEMAH theory. And the core idea is pretty simple, actually. It's that this ever-present bath of electromagnetic pollution, from our power grids, our cell networks, our satellites, all of it, that is the main engine driving accelerated warming. And the document is really clear about this. This isn't just some secondary factor. No, it's presented as the primary one, which, completely challenges the conventional CO2-focused model we all know.
But the author tries to build the statistical case even further. It's not just about that high correlation. The dossier also claims an R-squared value of 0.95. Now, to put that in simple terms, what he's arguing is that 95% of the variance, the changes we've seen in global temperatures, can be statistically explained by the growth of this EMF infrastructure. And that p-value you see, it suggests the odds of this whole thing being just a random fluke are, incredibly low.
And to really drive home the urgency, the author puts this correlation into a pretty stark historical context. Just look at this table. The document points out that the links between, say, asbestos and cancer, or CFCs in the ozone hole, these things led to massive global action. And they were based on correlations that were, according to this, actually weaker than the one being claimed for EM pollution. So the question being posed is pretty clear. If this is true, why isn't this potential link being investigated with the exact same level of urgency?
Okay, but a strong correlation is one thing, right? As they say, correlation isn't causation. So how could this even work physically? That's the big question. Well, let's get into the next section, which dives right into the physics the author is proposing.
Yeah, this is the big obvious question, isn't it? I mean, it sounds kind of crazy. How could our power lines and Wi-Fi routers actually heat up the entire planet? Well, the document doesn't shy away from this at all. In fact, it proposes a very specific physical mechanism to explain it.
And to make this whole concept easier to wrap your head around, the author uses a really common analogy, an induction cooktop. You know how those work, right? The cooktop surface itself stays cool, but it uses a magnetic field to directly heat the metal pan you put on top of it. Well, the theory suggests our entire atmosphere is being heated in a very similar way. So the really crucial part is, how does this scale up from a stovetop to the entire planet? The theory lays it out in a three-step process. First, the idea is that our atmosphere is just saturated with these tiny conductive metallic nanoparticles, from industrial pollution, volcanoes, all sorts of sources. Step 2, these microscopic particles all act together like a giant planet-sized network of antennas. And then, the third step, the EM fields from all our technology induce tiny electric currents in these little particles. That heats them up, and they, in turn, heat the air all around them. So, in effect, the atmosphere itself becomes the heating element.
And for a real-world example to back this idea up, this idea of a conductive network in the air, the document points to lightning. It argues that lightning doesn't just randomly slash through the air. Instead, it follows these invisible, pre-existing paths of metallic nanoparticles. And the author claims this is exactly why volcanic eruptions, which just spew tons of metallic ash into the atmosphere, can cause such a dramatic increase in lightning.
Okay, and this is where the dossier takes a really big turn, because the author argues that you can't fully understand this climate theory on its own. It's presented as just one single piece of a much larger, all-encompassing cosmological framework, one that's basically trying to rethink the fundamental nature of reality itself.
So at the very heart of this new cosmology is something the author calls the phasma substrate. And the core idea here is, well, to throw out the concept of empty space entirely. Instead, this theory suggests that space is actually a physical medium, just densely packed with these flexible polyhedral units. So it's not described as some abstract mathematical field, but as a real, tangible substance that can be physically bent and stressed by mass and energy.
And this really shows you the scale of the paradigm shift being proposed. In this framework, for example, gravity isn't the curvature of space-time anymore. It's the physical stress on this phasma substrate. Time dilation? That's not time itself changing, but just the rate of molecular processes slowing down or speeding up. What the author is trying to do here is provide a different, kind of mechanical explanation for some of the biggest mysteries in the universe.
So you might be wondering, how does someone even arrive at such a massive, sweeping new model of, well, everything? The author is actually really direct about the method. This quote explains it all. The framework was developed through logical synthesis and pattern recognition, not traditional lab experiments. The critical claim, though, is that this is still science because it produces specific, testable predictions. And all of that brings us to the final section of the dossier, and really its ultimate purpose, to move from all this theory to a direct and very urgent call to action. The author frames the whole situation using this asymmetric risk analysis. The logic is pretty straightforward. If the theory is correct and we act on it now, civilization is saved. Great. If the theory is wrong but we act anyway, okay, we've wasted some money, but we also get better shielded technology out of it. But, and this is the big one, if the theory is right and we do nothing, the document predicts irreversible planetary collapse. The whole argument is that the potential cost of doing nothing is just so much greater than the cost of being wrong.
So, based on that risk analysis, the dossier lays out a really clear set of demands. It's calling on scientists to immediately design and execute experiments to validate all this. It's calling on policymakers to fund an emergency program. We're talking $100 to $500 million to make that happen. And it's calling on the public to demand that this investigation happens and to spread the word. This is a direct appeal to pretty much every level of society.
And the timeline presented for all this action? It is incredibly stark. The document warns that we have only 5 to 10 years left before we hit some kind of irreversible threshold. The predicted collapse comes between 2045 and 2050. And this is why the entire dossier is framed as an emergency warning. It argues that massive countermeasures, like shielding our global infrastructure, would need to start, well, pretty much immediately. And the whole document ends with this really provocative statement. It kind of leaves the reader and us to just sit with the implications. An extraordinary claim has been made, backed up by the author's own analysis. And so the final question it poses isn't really about whether the theory is true or not. It's about what our responsibility is now that we've heard it.